Hello, in this video tutorial you'll learn about the evolution of pitch scale styles, a subject from the Schillinger System of musical composition. We'll study a number of methods for creating related scales with specific pitch unit and interval properties. I'll demonstrate each of these with an example melodic continuity in a unique musical style. In this tutorial series, we're looking at the theory of pitch scales from the Schillinger System of musical composition. The focus is on the so-called first group of scales, and you'll learn about methods for obtaining related pitch scales through evolution. As always, I'll present application examples of a melodic continuity in various styles. We start with a recap of the essentials from part 1 in the series. Our subject is part of the Schillinger System of Musical Composition framework, a set of books in 2 volumes that cover many aspects of music creation. Book 2 is about pitch scales and has a number of chapters that discuss scale groups and how to evolve scales, how they are used in modulations and the relation between melody and harmony. In this video we'll look at the evolution aspect. Books 3 and 4 will be covered in other tutorials, while there is already a significant collection of tutorials on Book 5, the special Theory of Harmony. Schillinger discerns 4 groups of pitch scales. His starting point is the equal-tempered chromatic scale, and you may use scales with single or multiple symmetrically distributed roots. Another characteristic is the range of the scale, and the Schillinger system frequently presents generalization concepts. In Group 1 we find the scales with a single root, with a diatonic character and the range limited to 1 octave. Group 1 scales typically have between 3 and 9 pitch units. In part 1 you learned about working with pitch scales and how to create a melodic continuity. To this end there was a 5-step procedure where we first determined the possible set of melodic forms, through permutation of the ordered pitch unit set in the scale. Connecting a number of melodic forms with recurrence coefficients yields a melodic continuity that in the last step must be overlaid with a time rhythm. It is important to realize that a melodic continuity is not the same as a fully fledged melody. It lacks several properties of a good melody, and the latter subject is covered in a separate Schillinger book. And now to the new content, the evolution of pitch scale styles as covered in Chapter 3 from Book 2. Here's a diagram with an overview of the evolution methods presented in that chapter. The starting point is an original pitch scale, a set of n ordered pitch units or intervals. We'll look at 4 different approaches to pitch scale evolution. Frequently returning techniques in the Schillinger system are permutation and generalization. I depicted these methods in 3 columns to show that through evolution the number of pitches may increase, remain constant or decrease. Now let's study these approaches in detail. The first method generates pitch scale families by using the interval identity feature. I'll mark the current approach in the overview diagram. The creation of families has been discussed in the theory of rhythm, for which I wrote a guide ebook and created an overview video on this channel. Also in part 1, near the end you'll find an example that uses a rhythm family, and a diagram that illustrates the process, which is analogous to what we will do now in the pitch domain. Here's the starting point, a group 1 pitch scale on root C with 2 intervals and therefore 3 pitch units. This is the parent generation, shown in staff notation and in diagram. We start the evolution process by permutating the 2 interval units of 5 and 2 semitones. Synchronizing the 2 permutations yields the first child generation, with 4 pitch units here C, D, F and G. Again we use circular permutation to obtain 2 alternative scales within this generation. After synchronization of these 3 children we obtain the next evolution level, with 6 pitch units marked here in the diagram. Through circular interval permutation we get 4 alternative scales at this level, with semitone and whole tone intervals. Synchronization of this child generation leads to the final evolutionary step, a chromatic scale with uniform distribution. After showing the evolutionary process for a scale family, let's apply the result to our first example. Here we see a melodic continuity based on the 3 generations of the scale family that we developed thus far. We use a single scale from each generation and multiple melodic forms for that scale. Note that the melodic form is an ordered series that must contain all pitch units. The overall compass is determined by the parent generation, here the perfect fifth between C and G. This example continuity shows that it is not a real melody with a suitable pitch curve. However, in my selection of melodic forms, I take into account aspects such as stepwise movement versus leaps, where alterations are going, the positioning of the highest pitches and stressing a tonic degree, here C. That is my set of tools for creating something that musically makes sense. After overlaying an attack duration series, a time rhythm, we obtain the final product, a quasi-melody in a dance-like setting. Listen to a flute playing this phrase. Let's reuse the scale family. In this melodic continuity, we use multiple scales and melodic forms from the 3 generations. The result is a new ordering of the pitch units. When applying a rhythmic pattern, here I created a 4/4 meter quasi-melody with 2 phrases. The character is different from the previous example. Note the handling of the chromatic alterations in the second phrase. Let's generate another pitch scale family, this time starting from a parent generation with 3 intervals. The scale contains pitches C, E flat, A and B flat with corresponding intervals 3, 6 and 1 semitone. Synchronization of the circular permutations of the parent scale yields This is the octatonic scale at the first child generation, which has 1 permutation. And this is the evolution endpoint before reaching the chromatic scale. I will not use this family for a music example. Instead, let's create a different 3-interval scale family, now starting on root C with intervals of 3, 5 and 2 semitones. There are 2 more circular permutations in the parent generation G1. The child generation G2 scales contain 7 pitch units. For this specific interval order, we find 4 different circular permutations. Repeating the process would yield the chromatic scale between lowest and highest pitch. Let's create an Andantino melodic continuity with this scale family. In this example, all scale variants are being used, 2 of them with multiple melodic forms MF1 and MF2. Again, I designed these melodic forms in such a way that I somehow achieve a continuity that has desirable properties, somewhat like a real melody. With superposition of a time rhythm, I obtain descending 16th note arpeggios and a sequence of steps and leaps that suggest cadences in the key of B flat major minor. The second evolution method is based on pitch unit identity and produces derivative scales. In the overview diagram, note that while scale families contain increasing pitch unit numbers in successive child generations, derivative scales have the same number of pitches as the original scale. I'll illustrate the process with this 5-pitch example scale that has 4 different intervals. Apply circular pitch permutation and obtain 4 derivative scales, each starting on the next higher degree in the original scale. When transposing the derivative scales to the root degree C of the original, we find the 5 modal variants. Note that the compass may vary between a minor sixth and a minor seventh. Let's use this result in a melodic continuity example that simply juxtaposes the 5 derivative scales, but each with a different melodic form, the ordered pitch set in the scale. The agitato character here is obtained through a 16th note pattern with repeated pitches and the staccato 8th notes. The overall pitch tendency is ascending with a climax apex near the end. You may base an alternative melodic continuity on the transposed derivative scales, the sequence of modal variants shown here. In this example, 2 modal scales use 2 different melodic forms. With the rhythmic pattern overlay, we see a phrase with march character. Note the inner melodic chromatic stepwise motion, marked here with brackets. The voice leading hints at the key of C minor. When we apply the same permutation process to a diatonic 7-pitch scale, the resulting derivative scales will be our familiar diatonic modes. That is illustrated here for the original diatonic scale and 2 circular pitch permutations. Transpose these to the original root C and you will recognize the Ionian, Dorian and Phrygian modal scales. Schillinger discusses these in a separate section on historical scale development in this chapter. Another set of derivative scales is obtained by permutating the interval sequence instead of the pitch units. This method also keeps the number of pitches constant, and I'll demonstrate the process for this 5-pitch example scale on root C. As the diagram shows, circular permutation of the interval series of 3, 2, 1 and 4 semitones yields 3 derivative scales in yellow, and shown here in staff notation. This second set of derivative scales, based on interval permutations, is turned into a melodic continuity in 6/8 time signature. I've used the original sequence of 4 scale variants, each used once but with a different melodic form, such that we obtain repeated notes. The rhythm pattern yields a cheerful phrase for clarinet. The scale variants suggest blue notes in the key of C major. The final subphrase is repeated in rhythmic augmentation. We continue with the method of summation that yields partial pitch scales. As can be observed in the overview diagram, this evolution leads to fewer pitch units in the scale. This time the original scale example consists of 6 pitches and, correspondingly, 5 intervals. The evolution process is illustrated in this diagram and is based on the summation of 2 or more neighboring intervals. The number of pitches decreases correspondingly, as can be seen here for the 4 sets of partial scales in different color. There are 4 different options for the 5-pitch partial scales, while summing 4 intervals leaves only 2 alternatives. Here are the sum by 2 intervals partial scales. The 3 options for summing by 3 intervals, and finally the 2 partial scales when summing 4 intervals. Note that the scales contain more wider interval leaps as we increase the number of summed intervals. Let's look at an example continuity with the method of summation. The example uses a combination of partial pitch scales at different summation levels, starting with the 6-pitch scale and ending with the 2 3-pitch scales. Here I demonstrate a cubic Schillinger rhythm based on 1 plus 1 plus 2 time units. This pattern has self-scaling property, with longer duration notes near the end. This continuity has deliberate a major-minor ambiguity. It is played by muted trumpet with a simple 3-part harmony background for pizzicato strings. There's another method for generating partial scales, through the selection of either pitch unit or interval subsets. We are still in the final branch of the overview diagram, with evolution into scales with fewer pitches. I'll demonstrate this method for the same 6-pitch example scale. As the diagram shows, we eliminate increasing numbers of neighboring pitches from the original scale. The number of partial scales increases from 2 to 5 as we move from subset selection of 5 to 2 pitches. In staff notation, here we see the 2 partial scales with 5 pitch units. The 3 variants with 4 pitches, note that the scales maintain the original stepwise interval character as we decrease the pitch unit number to 3. And finally, here's the subset selection with 2 pitches. Hopefully you're still curious for another application example, especially when using scales with very small pitch numbers. Well, here's the melodic continuity, based on a sequence of all possible partial scales with differently sized subsets, each using a single melodic form. Note what I did for the 2-unit scales at the end, where we only have 2 possible melodic forms, reversing the pitch order. And here is the obligatory and inevitable error that happens in all my videos. The E natural should have been E flat, but I liked it and decided to benefit from this case of serendipity. It also proves that I appreciate the Schillinger system potential, but I am not a blind follower of his methods, and instead use personal taste and preferences. The time rhythm overlay is based on the Schillinger 5/4 rhythm family, but here starting with the short duration child generations and ending with the longer notes at the parent level. I used mixed instrumentation for the subphrases and added a simple 3-part sustained string background in this Lento tranquilo continuity setting. The final evolution method also uses subset selection, but this time applied to the interval series in the scale. Let's return to our example scale once more. The interval sequence is 1, 2, 2, 3, 1 semitones. Partial scales are now obtained by clipping one or more intervals from the series, keeping the remaining neighboring intervals. Here you see the partial scale options in different color as we eliminate more and more intervals. This time we stop at the 4 options for the 2 interval scales. Listen to the 4 interval scales. The evolution into 3 interval options. And the partial scales with 2 intervals. Here's one more example, an Allegro marcato setting in 3/4 meter. In this continuity, once again I moved from the 5 interval to the 2 interval partial scales, but of course you are free to use any ordered combination. Some scales use multiple melodic forms. And note that I used octave transposition for some of the scales for increased musical interest. In the instrumentation, I used frequent doubling. That brings us to the summary and conclusion of this tutorial, which is about the evolution of Group 1 pitch scales in the Schillinger system. I discussed all approaches presented in the Schillinger book. The common property is that all start from an original scale, that is then processed to obtain either a family with more pitch units, derivative or modal variants with equal pitch number through circular permutation, or partial scales with reduced pitch numbers when summing or selecting pitch unit or interval subsets. These approaches will have various degree of similarity to the original scale, and I don't consider each method equally suitable for application. Yet I decided to stick to the Schillinger approaches and created melodic continuity examples for each of them. As I've said before, a melodic continuity does not carry the properties of a good melody, but still they may be used in the right context and with an appropriate setting, as I've tried to prove here. If you like this tutorial, give it a thumbs up. If you have not done so yet, please subscribe and help to increase the channel visibility. Feel free to embed or share these videos. A link to a PayPal donation button in the description below enables you to support my tutorial production. Visit the website for more content and purchase ebooks. Hope to see you back next time. Stay safe, and for now, thanks for watching.